Hello and welcome to Revenge of the Drive-In. This is the podcast where we watch and review two movies randomly selected from a list of over 2,000. This week's movies are 1990's Arachnophobia and 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla. And I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined by...
Jim. Hello, Patrick. Hello, everybody else.
Hello, Jim. I think I speak for everybody else in saying that. So let's get started with Arachnophobia. Had you seen this before?
Yeah, years ago. And I'll be honest, I didn't think much of it then, and I don't think that much of it now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's my sneak peek for my thoughts. I mean, it's a fine movie.
You got to at least respect John Goodman. I mean, John Goodman is a master at his craft.
Yeah, well, I've always thought of Arachnophobia as kind of Disney's answer to Tremors.
Yeah, I think there's some, I don't know specifically with Tremors, but there is something about the horror of Arachnophobia, this type of horror. I'll call it Spielbergian horror, because Steven Spielberg, of course, is a producer here. He's not directing it, but if you look at some of the other horror movies he produced but didn't direct, i.e., I think the big one is Gremlins. There's also Poltergeist, which Poltergeist hits a little harder, certainly, than this movie or than Gremlins does, but there's still that kind of Spielberg family dynamic there. And then, I mean, so you see that here, and yeah, this is very, very, I guess, I mean, this movie's also a comedy, which... Or
as they said in the marketing posters, it is a thrill-omedy.
Oh, okay. You know, it's a horror movie, it's a comedy, it's a thrill-omedy, I suppose, but, you know, it doesn't have the same kind of punch that a non-blockbuster type horror movie has. I mean,
yeah,
I guess you go back to Spielberg's first big break is Jaws. That became a blockbuster, but, I mean, it kind of just became a blockbuster because it was that frickin' good. It was like... Mm-hmm. I don't know. It just there's a different feel to a movie like that than there is here, and you know, comparing it to Tremors is pretty fair. Tremors kind of has that horror comedy aspect to it.
Well, I think maybe the only reason I've kind of thought of it as like a worse version of Tremors is because I think both movies came out the same year.
Yeah.
And what was Tremors? Universal?
I have no idea. I mean, if I knew you were going to talk about Tremors, I would have done my fucking research on Tremors before recording this, okay? Oops. I just want to make that clear.
But, you know...
I'm not... Are you sure this is Disney, by the way? You said, I mean,
yeah,
Disney-fied or whatever.
It's a subsidiary of Disney that produced it. Hollywood Pictures.
Hollywood Pictures sounds like a fake.
I know.
That's it. The Amir Shervan, his movies were under Hollywood Royal Pictures or something.
Oh,
just make it sound official, why don't you?
Both movies came out the same year, Tremors and this, and you always hear stories about competing production companies getting scoops on what like another production company's making.
Oh yeah, like Ants and Bug's Life, that stuff.
And yeah, and I just kind of think two thrill-omedies set in small-town America with colorful characters, leaning more into the kind of comedy strain than horror. Other than Tremors, there's some pretty terrifying scenes in that movie. It's just too much of a coincidence, you know? And I think...
By the way, Tremors is Universal, so you were right on your speculation there.
Wow.
So perhaps lending credence to your whack job of a theory here.
I think it's a great theory.
There's a sound logic to it, but I don't know. I mean, the point of like Ants and A Bug's Life, the relationship between those movies is they at least use the same animal.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
You see what I mean?
Arachnophobia,
Tremors, not really the same thing, just kind of tonally similar. There's similar movies, sort of, but not, you know, different creatures entirely.
Well, and also, are you terrified of spiders? Are you an arachnophobe? Are you know?
Terrified isn't the right word. When I was a kid, they really frightened me, but no, for me it's rats. It's not spiders. Spiders, a little creepy, but I mean, what about you?
I'm more afraid of giant man-eating sandworms living under the desert. you know? So again, maybe that's why I think this is kind of like a poor man's Tremors. Okay, well, let's get on with Arachnophobia. We're just going to jump right into it, because this movie stars a bunch of, I don't want to say nobodies, but a lot of people who haven't done that much other than John Goodman and, what's his face?
Jeff Daniels.
Thank you, Jeff Daniels.
Who I saw on Broadway a few years ago. He was in he played the role of Atticus Finch in the Aaron Sorkin To Kill a Mockingbird. He was quite good at that.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Hollywood Pictures and Amblin Entertainment present Arachnophobia. 8 legs, 2 fangs, and an attitude.
Perk up, Lloyd. If we find the spider that did this, you can arrest him.
Arachnophobia, a thrillometer.
Well, Jerry Manley, a photographer from Canaima, California, this is the small town, is called to Venezuela to assist, I guess, this world-renowned entomologist. I think his name's Dr. Atherton.
Played by Julian Sands, who I've seen him in a bunch of stuff. I'm not really sure why.
A lot of these actors were kind of around in the 90s in various things.
Sure.
They have familiar faces, but you can't put names to them. This Atherton is cataloging new species of insects, or at least attempting to, in Venezuela, and they stumble upon this new type of spider. So Dr. Atherton brings back these spiders and butterflies and all kinds of critters back to this camp, and on further examination he realizes that these spiders are more like drones.
Yeah, they don't have sex organs.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, let me ask you a question. Is Atherton up to no good from the start? Is he up to shady shit? Because I feel like the film kind of implies he is.
You know what? I think it implies he is,
but they don't go far enough to making him like a mad scientist or anything like that. You know?
And
they could have done that.
And the first kind of like hint that you think is up to something shady is like how they collect the bugs, and I don't know if that's how they do it in real life. If it is, that's very unfortunate. But he just pumps like a toxic gas cloud into a tree on this like plateau that hasn't had human feet on it for a million years or whatever, and then all these...
By the way, this location here, which I say location, I'm sure it's a set, or maybe I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I would imagine it is, reminds me of the scene in the Peter Jackson King Kong remake when they're in that pit of bugs.
Oh,
I don't know,
yes.
For me there was some kind of visual similarity, even though this is much more colorful, that's much more gray, and I don't know. I was just thinking of that. And there are insects, of course, although giant ones in that. Well, the spiders aren't giant spiders, but they're bigger spiders. They lean towards the heavier side as far as spiders go.
The heavier side. Yeah, they're like tarantulas, as opposed to house spiders.
Yeah, I've actually heard... I don't know if this is accurate, but I have heard, like... So I've always thought... If you see a hairy spider, it's a tarantula. Apparently that isn't... I've been told that isn't always the case. There are some spiders that are like tarantula size, but I don't know if that's true. So,
you know, I've never heard that. I always thought that the hairier spiders were tarantulas. I've never seen like
they're just Greek spiders.
Like you've never seen like a hairy daddy long legs. Like, you know what I mean? Like.
I don't know. I think there's some family of spiders out there, or some family of arachnids that is big and hairy that isn't tarantulas. I think. That's what I've been told. I don't know if it's true or not.
Hey, well, there's that spider that was found, wasn't it, like right below San Quentin prison? And they named it after Johnny Cash. I think they called it like Johnny I. Cassius or something.
Oh yeah, there's a joke about they're going to name the spider after Manley, the photographer in this.
Yeah, well, and again, and he's kind of a fun character because he's such a wimp about being in Venezuela, and he's got like a fever, and he doesn't like bugs, and you know he's been brought in to photograph all these critters and stuff. But when Atherton asks him what his specialty is, he says football.
Oh yeah, he's wearing a Miami is it a Miami Dolphins
hat? Yeah.
That doesn't make sense if he's from Northern California, but whatever.
Maybe that was the only hat they had on set.
Yeah, I shouldn't say it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't, connect to where he actually is from, but okay.
Well, this poor, unfortunate Manley, back at the camp, he's kind of feeling sick, and this is after the revelation that these spiders are just drones.
Also, not a revelation, but we saw one of those spiders jump into the cargo that they were pulling.
Yeah, like all the scientific stuff that they were bringing back to the camp.
No one noticed it, but we did. a keen eye on the viewer will notice this thing that gets its own musical sting, and
it gets its own.
It's really subtle.
Close up, crawling out of.
Yeah,
like
I'm not even complaining like it's stupid or anything. I don't know.
Okay, before we go any further, there's just something about this movie, the way they film or show these spiders, which it would be so much more interesting if they had the spiders in the background and you were just kind of like constantly looking for them throughout the movie. But I think because they realized that they're spiders and they're generally much more difficult to see, they have to like do these constant close-ups of spiders doing spidery things like crawling around and with these musical stings to know that, oh, it's getting closer to somebody, like somebody's cat or some person.
I liked the scene when it first got loose back in California. I thought they did a pretty good job with that, where because it's kind of hidden by the casket and stuff a lot. Like, I thought that was pretty good.
Well, that scene is one of my favorites, but we'll get to that in a second, because poor old Manly, he gets attacked by this spider. He's just sleeping in his tent, trying to sleep off his fever, and he gets bitten on the leg. And he kind of goes into some pretty serious convulsions and then dies.
Yeah, it's almost immediate. He dies probably within 10 seconds.
Yes, yeah. So Atherton is alerted, and him and his team make this like makeshift wooden coffin, and they just chuck him in there, and they're like, well, we'll send him home, I guess. But unbeknownst to them, this spider that killed him, because they don't think that it was a spider that killed him, they thought it was the fever. This spider crawls into the coffin and is shipped back to Canaima, California. California.
This whole opening, in my opinion, way too big. You know what I mean? It's just...
Well, especially for Canaima.
No, yeah, everything in the Venezuelan jungle. Okay, we need some backstory to understand why this incredibly dangerous spider gets to California. I get it. But this just feels like we are using a Spielberg budget and no one's going to stop us, you know?
Yes,
like, I want to see... I think this movie would work a little bit better if it starts with the family moving in and stuff. And I understand, like, then you kind of have to explain how the spider gets there. I get it, but I don't know. It reminds me of, like, Congo or something. It's like this high adventure movie, and then it's just not.
I understand what you're saying, and like I really liked all the stuff in Venezuela because the opening is probably like 15 minutes long or something like that.
Yeah, it's not super long, but it's a reasonable chunk of time. Also, it doesn't do a great job of establishing the tone of the movie.
No,
sure, we get the spider established. We see what it can do, how it can kill people. There's not a lot of like humor in this. Like the humor, let me take that back a second. There is a little bit of humor in the, you know, what do you specialize in, football, that kind of stuff, but it's not really, doesn't really match the humor of like later in the movie. It's kind of its own thing, and that just feels like stuff that would happen. That feels like the kind of humor that would be in just like an adventure movie. Like, you know, there's a little bit of comedy in the beginning of like Indiana Jones or something. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know, it feels a little weird to me.
Well, and also the humor in this movie I would call kind of like a family-friendly humor.
Mostly.
It's lots of like eye-rolling and being like, oh, that thing that was said was silly, ha ha, you know? I don't want to call it a lazy humor. It's just like, if you're going to make a movie about killer spiders, then go all the way. Go full bore, you know what I mean? Or get like a giant spider. How can we have a spider the size of my fist?
Because that's too tongue-in-cheek. That's too 50s sci-fi horror. There's,
you're probably right.
Plus, we've already done a movie about giant spiders this season and the giant spider invasion, so I don't need another one of those.
Well, luckily for you, they're not giant, but it is an invasion. So when this coffin is opened in Canaima, we see these kind of clever shots of the spider hiding in the coffin while one of the morticians is kind of walking around talking on the phone. And we get this really cool reveal where we're expecting to just see Manly's body, but the mortician fella, he calls up Manly's parents, I think, and he says, you know, I know we spoke about having an open casket, but I really think we should change that. And the camera pans down and he's kind of like drained of all of his juices. He looks like a human husk. Mm-hmm. Which is really, really interesting.
Also, we get classic morgue humor where the mortician is eating.
Yes.
I've seen this in so many movies.
Yeah.
Friday the 13th, the final chapter is the one I always think of, but I've seen so many morgues eating while examining bodies. It's incredibly lazy humor, but I like it.
When I saw him put his sandwich down on the table, I was like, ugh. I was disgusted. Coming from somebody who used to work in a morgue frequently, I was disgusted.
Well, the cat wasn't. The cat took the sandwich.
Yeah, it did. You're right, damn cat. But after this coffin is opened, we get this kind of cute, funny, interesting spider escape scene where this spider starts trying to leave the morgue, and he runs into the owner's cat, and this dog comes through the doggy door, and the spider chases the dog off, and the spider goes through the doggy door, gets outside, and then a crow immediately swoops down and picks it up and begins flying this thing across town, where eventually the spider bites the crow, kills it midair, and it drops to the ground.
There's a couple things I liked about this. One, I genuinely don't know how they pulled off the point of view of the spider when it got picked up. Because this is before drones and stuff, and there is a shot from... I mean, most of the time when the bird is flying, it's just a shot of the bird, but when the spider's first picked up, it's the POV of the spider just going up, and I don't know if that's... I mean, I guess it had to have been a crane, but they made it look very fluid and everything.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a crane shot. And then also, I want to understand, why is it okay to kill a bird, but we can't kill a cat? You know?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
There's still an innocent little animal is well, innocent. I mean, it did attack, but like they could have easily killed the cat in this. I just don't like cats. I get it, but like I don't know.
Well, and there's lots of cats in this movie that could have been killed. Though I think we do see a dead cat at one point in a spider web. Luckily for us, the viewer of this fine film, the spider is dropped on the newly purchased property of, don't tell me what his name is.
The Jennings family has just moved to the small town of Canaima.
Oh, Ross, smell that air. Oh, God.
Dr. Ross Jennings, played by Jeff Daniels, as we mentioned, and his lovely family that have, again, just moved into this farmhouse in the middle of the countryside because he's going to be the new town's doctor because the old doctor's going to retire or supposed to retire.
All right, so his wife is played by the actress Harley Jane Kozak, who apparently now is a successful mystery writer, so she doesn't act anymore. There's also a kind of a cult actress from 80s horror movies known as Heidi Kozak. I don't want to say for my entire life because it's not like I knew about these people my entire life, but for a long time I just assumed these two were sisters, right? Same spelling, Kozak.
Yeah.
They're not, even though Harley Jane Kozak appears in The House on Sorority Row. That's her film debut. And Heidi Kozak is in Slumber Party Massacre 2. Okay, so what? There's just two Kozaks going around in these cheap 80s slasher movies? Is just weird to me. They're not related. It's just strange.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, you know, Heidi Kozak, I guess she's American, but she was born in Denmark. This Kozak, Harley Jane, born in Pennsylvania, so...
Well, our Kozak, her kids alert her to a spider in the house. And we think it's this giant poisonous Venezuelan spider. But it turns out to be just a harmless little old house spider. So because now they're living in the country and because people are inherently good, she takes out this spider with her kids and puts it in their brand new, cool, dilapidated barn. But she unknowingly introduces this common house spider to this crazy giant poisonous spider, and we see them start getting handsy. But then that's kind of left. Because the side story in this is Dr. Jennings and his family have moved to this town to, like I said, take over from this old doctor, but now the old doctor doesn't want to retire. Now he wants to just kind of stay in his post until he dies. So there's a whole side story in this movie going on about how Dr. Jennings is trying to find work, trying to get patients, and the spider's path and Dr. Jennings' path eventually intercept. The first patient he has, or the first like real normal townsperson he meets, is a woman named Margaret, I believe.
Yeah, I like this woman. She's
a cool dude, man. She's dope as a rope. She's like, look, this old doctor, he's too much of a fucking old fart, and he's got me on these medications for like heart problems, and I don't think I need them. And Dr. Jennings is like, yeah, you're right. You're fit as a fiddle. You don't need this medication. I don't know why he's prescribed you this medication. I'm taking you off this medication. And she says, you know, you need more patience. I'm going to throw you a big old party, and you're going to meet everybody in town, and everybody's going to realize how wonderful you are. They're going to come to be doctored by you. So that's exactly what she does. Dr. Jennings gets some information that Manly died in Venezuela on some kind of scientific excursion. He sees or he meets Manly's parents at the party, and his mother is quite drunk, and she's upset that she can't have an open casket funeral.
Right. Also, at this party, we get some of the most enjoyable characters. The football coach neighbor.
Yeah, he's great.
And he's hilarious in kind of a small part. There's a fun moment where he's talking about how his son is like, oh, my son's the quarterback of the high school team, just like I used to be, and everything. And then Harley Kozak's like, oh, nepotism, huh? And then that guy's wife is like, no, we're Anglican. What does she say? We're just like
evangelicals or something.
We're evangelicals or something. Yeah, that was a fun little moment. I like those guys. There's a little bit with the daughter where, what was her? Like what? They ask her, what are you going to school to study? And she's just like, gym.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny.
Well, there's also a funny character, a girl named Bunny, who's a neighbor kid. Jennings' kids and this neighbor kid go out to play at one point, and Jennings' wife is like, oh, I hope they're going to go catch crickets or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then it cuts to this girl, Bunny. Too. She goes, want to go blow up some frogs?
Yeah.
Want to blow up a bullfrog? Okay.
Yeah, but that party was good. And also you get to see more of that mortician, who's a funny character, who him and his wife are rather rotund, and they're caught by Margaret leaving their the party, just with like full plates. And she's like, do you guys want a doggy bag? But unfortunately for Margaret, one of these mutant spiders, one of these house spiders crossed with the poisonous spider.
Yeah, at this point we've got plenty of offspring, if we didn't mention that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen them. We don't really know how much time has passed.
And nor do I know how much time needs to pass for spiders to give birth. I have no idea.
When Margaret and Dr. Jennings first meet, Margaret says, next month I'll throw you a party when the evenings are cooler.
Okay.
But I guess I should also say as well, Jennings is terrified of spiders. He has arachnophobia.
The son, I want to say, is a little skittish around them.
They are completely unaware that this poisonous spider has made a nest in their dilapidated barn. And it is Jennings' wife who goes in and takes like some photographs of this big, beautiful spider's web in the barn. But let's fast forward again to Margaret's party. So as you said, Patrick, we already have like these scenes of spiders kind of crawling in various directions away from the barn. And one of these spiders heads to poor old Margaret's house. And we get this kind of tense little scene where we see a spider in the house and it's on the arm of a chair and it looks like it's going to kill her cat, this very fluffy, beautiful cat that Patrick hates. She moves the cat the last second, puts it outside, and as Margaret is feeling a little nostalgic, feeling a little love for her deceased husband, she goes to turn out the light next to her and the spider drops down from the lampshade and bites her on the hand. So the next day, Jennings and his wife are trying to get a hold of Margaret to thank her for the party, but she's not answering the phone. So Jennings goes over and finds her dead, and the town doctor is called, and the sheriff is called, and the sheriff's a real idiot, kind of like a country bumpkin. And the old doctor immediately rules her death as a heart attack. And then Jennings says, no, she was very fit. You gave her medication, but I took her off of it. And this leads the old doctor to kind of say, how dare you, you're an idiot, you've killed this woman, I want to sue you for malpractice, yada, yada, yada. And Dr. Jennings has this great line where he says something to the effect of, when people have a heart attack, or when a person has a heart attack, they don't usually bite their tongue off.
Yeah, and he wants an autopsy, but this town is very, very hesitant to do autopsies, and this other doctor in particular is, like, offended at the idea. I thought that was kind of weird, but
yeah, because I guess he respects Margaret.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, he's like, I don't want you chopping up that body. It's like, okay, whatever. It's just kind of strange.
Yes, yeah. Shortly after, Jennings is invited by this football father to come and give the entirety of the high school football team a bit of a checkup, which leads to a bit of a funny scene. But during this football practice, while Dr. Jennings is watching, we as the audience see one of these spiders crawl into the helmet of a player. And then this player runs by, puts the helmet on. In the middle of a tackle, he gets bitten by this spider and collapses. Jennings rushes out. They see that the kid is dead. But this old doctor, again, just chalks up to having a heart attack. He goes, oh, this kid must have just overexerted himself. He had a heart attack. What a shame. Oh, poor guy. Is this when the county coroner... No. It's the next death.
No, this is when he's known throughout the town
as Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, yeah.
Great nickname.
Dr. Death, I think, in addition to that was... what was that guy's name? The assisted suicide guy in Oregon. That was kind of his nickname.
Oh!
But I want to say Dr. Death is also a puppet master character. I could be wrong, but...
So the next death in the town happens when this old doctor, who's had it coming, is at home working out before bed on his little treadmill, and we see a spider crawl into one of his slippers. When he eventually does put his slipper on, he gets bitten on the toe, and he lifts his foot out of the slipper and he says, oh my god, I've been bitten by a spider. And then he kind of starts seizing or convulsing, and he tells his wife this.
His wife, by the way, is Frances Bay, who's in a bunch of... She's like classic character actress. If you need an old lady, this is your woman, right? Happy Gilmore's grandmother. She's in a bunch of David Lynch stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
She's in everything.
So as the old doctor is dying, he tells his wife, he says, call Jennings. And by the time that Jennings gets there, the doctor has already died. But Jennings has obviously been told by the doctor's wife that he was bitten by a spider, and then he started seizing. So this county coroner comes in, and Jennings explains what happens. He shows the spider bite on the doctor's foot to the county coroner, and they both decide that it's time to exhume some bodies. Because they're like, look, something isn't right here. People aren't just dying of heart attacks. They first call Dr. Atherton, and Dr. Atherton goes, look, it's probably not a spider. I'll send somebody, though. So he sends his assistant, Chris Collins. When Mr. Collins gets down there, that's when they decide to exhume some bodies to check for spider bites. And sure enough, on all the other victims, they find spider bites. So now they're pretty sure that there's an awful, terrible, poisonous spider running amok. And I think also, too, now Atherton is pretty interested. So he starts heading down.
Yeah, Atherton initially reacted when he heard it was Canaima. Because he's like, oh, Canaima.
Oh, that's right.
Like, oh, have you heard of it? Somewhere. Yeah, he's definitely intrigued. But I still don't know his motives. Like, was he trying to, like... I don't know what he wanted to do with the spiders to begin with, and maybe it's not important, but I'm still kind of... I guess I just can't get over how, like, kind of shady they wanted to present the character from the beginning, you know?
Yeah, well, he also looks kind of like a bad guy, sounds kind of like a bad guy,
yeah.
And then he's got one of these poisonous spiders in his office that he's feeding crickets and stuff.
He's just... this is a confusing character, what they're trying to do with him, I guess. His partner, his assistant, though, I like this guy. He's kind of fun.
Yeah, he's that, like, inexperienced assistant character. Like, he's squeamish at the sight of bodies or the smell of bodies, and he's a little jumpy as well, whereas somebody like Atherton is like, seen everything before, and he's not... But
he's also way more...
personable?
Way more... No, well, than Atherton, yes, of course, but he's also way more in charge when it actually comes to... spiders, when Jeff Daniels, almost like freezes at the sight of a spider. That one scene where they catch one in Margaret's the dining room.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he kind of shows his worth as a character in this movie in that scene. Yeah, so as you kind of just hinted at, one of their goals before Atherton shows up is to catch one of these spiders so that they can study it to see if it has any resemblance, I guess, to this giant poisonous spider. So they do catch a spider in Margaret's house, and there is this great scene where Collins kind of teaches Jeff Daniels to get over his fear. He's like, you've just got to move. Your body's telling you no, but you're going to be drawn towards this thing. Just move. Which, again, kind of happens later. Atherton finally shows up. They bring him this specimen, and they realize that this one also doesn't have any reproductive organs, and it has like a similar kind of like poison sac layout, I guess, in the body. So it must be related to this Venezuelan spider. And I think Atherton is the one who points out that it's a cross between this poisonous spider and just like a common house spider. So now the next big thing to do is find the Venezuelan spider and the spider nest, where all the other spiders are coming from.
Hang on. We have skipped the entirety of John Goodman's role up to this point.
Yeah, I know. Okay, hold on.
John Goodman is first introduced. John Goodman, of course, one of the greatest actors who's ever lived. He's absolutely hysterical. He's incredibly talented. He's a scene stealer in like everything he's in. And this movie, in my opinion, not an exception. But he is first introduced because Jeff Daniels thinks that they have termites because the wood in the wine cellar isn't good, and he goes to examine that, and he concludes there's no termites, it's just bad wood. But there's this great moment where he's speaking to the wife.
Would anybody object if I tore this floor out?
I would.
False alarm, then leave on.
And then he comes back, because he is the exterminator, so when they know it's a spider problem, he's back. He's like the town exterminator, they call him.
Yeah.
But he sprays one of those spiders with like a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't react to it. It doesn't die. Yeah. So he eventually just stomps on it. And then as he's like walking off, he's like all smug. He's like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm bad. Like, just classic Goodman stuff. And then later on, he comes back, he meets Atherton. And I love this scene. I love this line, I should say. Atherton is this scientist who studies spiders and stuff. And John Goodman introduces himself, and he's like, always great to meet a colleague. Like,
yeah.
This dude just kills bugs. He's not a colleague.
Yeah.
I love it.
He plays a fine character. The only reason I've kind of skipped him, or the only reason I have skipped over him,
he doesn't have a huge impact on the plot. That's true.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, like, all the house stuff, like when he's in the wine cellar, is funny. Like, I like when he shakes the bottle up. You know, when he's like holding the bottle, he just starts shaking it. He goes, "Oh yeah, I've got a bottle of or a can of Busch Light from 1973 with a misprint on it. Your husband can come and see that."
That was hilarious, yeah, because he's like, yeah, I collect beer cans myself. Because he's looking at this guy who's got like a $10,000 bottle of wine.
Yeah, or even there's even like a funny bit. I don't remember when it is, but I guess it's when he realizes that his poison doesn't kill these spiders. He's like, well, luckily I've got my own private reserve. And he just pulls out like this other poison from the back of his truck.
He's got like a proton pack.
He does, yeah, that's exactly it.
I don't know, maybe exterminators actually have that stuff. I don't really know.
He's a fun character. He just doesn't have much to do, even in the end, really. He's just kind of there. He's a great actor, and he does steal the show in every scene that he's in this movie. So all the main characters kind of split up into two groups. I believe it's Jennings, Collins, and I almost wanted to call him Jeff Goldblum, John Goodman. They form a team because this Venezuelan spider got out of the casket at the morgue. They assume that the nest is at the morgue. So the three of them head over to the morgue where I guess the mortician and his wife also live. And unfortunately, when they get there, they find that they've been killed. And I kind of like this scene because it shows that they were killed by their own gluttony. I think the spider's in like a bowl of popcorn that the mortician eats, and that kills them. So while they're at the morgue, Dr. Atherton is passing by like a photograph somewhere, and he says, "Where was that photo taken?" And the sheriff who's with him says, "Oh, that was taken by Dr. Jennings' wife at the barn on their property." And Atherton immediately realizes that that's the same web that the spider in his office has made. So they fly over to the barn, where Atherton walks into the barn to, I guess, try to confront the spider. Like, he's toying with it. He's tapping his finger on like that little like live wire, that signals spiders when something's in their web. And then it jumps down out of the rafters and just kills him. And by the time he dies, the rest of the characters have figured out that the nest is at Jennings' house. They decide to plot all the deaths on a map and realize that the center of all these deaths is Jennings' house, and spiders kind of move outwards from the nest. So they rush over, they find, or John Goodman finds, that Jennings has been killed. Collins, Jennings' wife, the kids, they're all in the house, and then the house just erupts into spiders. I don't know how to describe it other than that. Hundreds of thousands of these poisonous spiders start crawling all over the place. They're dropping down from the ceiling. Everybody crawls out the bathroom window onto the roof. Collins falls off the lattice onto the ground. Jennings is then trapped in the house. He falls off or over the banister, I guess, into the cellar, through the rotten floor, into the cellar.
The payoff for the bad wood termite infestation earlier in the movie.
And he falls right through into the nest. So now his job is to kill this spider and the nest. And it's kind of like a hectic last couple of scenes here. He's just fighting this spider, and at one point, Jennings himself knocks over all of these bottles of wine and this giant wine rack that's 8 feet tall or something, and it kind of pins him under all the wine. Because he hates spiders and because he really wants to kill this thing, he just starts throwing bottles of his expensive wine at this spider, hoping to crush it. And there's a funny scene where he picks up one bottle and he goes, no, not the chateau, and then just grabs another bottle and whips it at the spider. I don't recall how, but eventually Jennings starts lighting things on fire. And I think it's with a can of, like an aerosol can and a lighter or something.
Yeah, I believe so.
So he just starts lighting his cellar on fire. This climactic battle with a spider is, with a backdrop of fire in this cellar is kind of exciting to watch. Jennings succumbs to his fear of spiders, but at the last second, he remembers what Collins told him, and he moves, and he catapults this spider off a piece of wood into this pile of flames.
That's wonderful.
I really like how they did this. When you think it's over, the spider comes flying out on fire, leaving a little trail of fire all over the cellar, and Jennings picks up this nail gun thing that he was using earlier in the movie to test the rotten wood, and just as the spider leaps in the air, he shoots it and pins it to the nest, and both the spider and the nest go up in flames.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much the end of the movie. It ends.
No, it ends on a hilarious joke.
Well, hold
on.
on. It ends kind of abruptly. That's the whole story in the town there in Canaima.
Sure.
And then we see Jennings and his wife. They've moved back to San Francisco, and they're enjoying some red wine. They're like, well, we're back now. Screw the country. I hate it. And then they get a big earthquake with some aftershocks, and they'd rather deal with that than spiders. And that's it.
Wonderful joke to end the movie on. One of the funnier parts of the movie, I thought.
Which also, I want to point out, in the end of that movie, they're talking about Tremors. So, maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to my theory. But that's it. That's Arachnophobia. Patrick, my dear friend, what did you think of Arachnophobia?
I like Arachnophobia. Based on your little intro here, it sounds like I enjoyed it a hell of a lot more than you did, even though I don't love it. For me, you compared this to Tremors as a, ants to a Bug's Life thing, and it was, we debated for a while. I think this is about as good as Tremors. I maybe it should be noted I don't love Tremors the way some people do, but I do like it. And to me, this is just about as good as Tremors. It's no Poltergeist. It's maybe a little bit worse than Gremlins, as far as that Spielberg produced horror goes. But the humor really worked in the second half. There wasn't much of it in the first half. The second half, I found it to be consistently funny, and a lot of that is because John Goodman's in more of the second half, I think.
Yeah.
I just love the way he talks. There's where they're trying to figure out where the nest is. Jeff Daniels it's in the barn. And he's like, no, I don't know about that. They don't usually like going in places like barns. And then Jeff Daniels is like, listen, I saw the web in my barn. And then he just pauses and goes, a web would indicate an arachnoid infestation. Yes, it's just really funny just how he talks. I love it. So I'm a huge John Goodman fan, and this movie got my Goodman fix in. No, I like it. It's a little, I like some of the small town stuff. I think they could have done more with the small town had they not had the big 15-minute Venezuelan opening, because I kind of liked the scenes when it was just him dealing with this asshole of a old-fashioned doctor and stuff. And also I will say that Jeff Daniels plays an excellent everyman, but he's an everyman here with a little sarcastic edge to him, and so I think that makes him kind of an enjoyable character. So yeah, I like the movie. Jim, what about you?
Well, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Again, I don't like it as much as Tremors, to bring up Tremors again. To me, this is just one of those movies that was always playing on, cable around, 3 in the afternoon. You know what I mean? It was just,
I never saw it on cable. First time I ever saw it, I was living in Canada, so it wasn't that long ago.
Oh,
so
really?
This isn't a movie that I grew up with by any means.
Whenever I would see it, it was just always like on cable. It was like a 3:00 in the afternoon movie, because like
sure
that was like the dip for television right during the day.
Now it's just any time of day.
Yeah.
If it's not on like HBO, it's like not worth watching for the most part. All I watch is like Jeopardy, and I'll just be like looking like, okay, Jeopardy's on in a half hour. Let me see what's on. Oh, fucking nothing. And Jeopardy's over. Let me see what's on after Jeopardy. Oh, nothing. Literally nothing.
Yeah, I feel you, man. This movie, though, I agree with you in that I wish it had kind of...
There's a Wheel of Fortune joke in this movie, by the way. Speaking of terrible television.
Oh, is there?
Where he's trying to call... it must be his patient, because he's trying to reach her on the phone. Or he's trying to reach someone on the phone, and then he's like, they're not answering the phone. And then I think the sheriff is like, well, hang on, it's Wheel of Fortune time. They always unplug their phones during Wheel of Fortune or something.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was for the mortician, wasn't it? That's a good joke. Yeah, with this movie, though, I agree with you. I wish it had kind of opened up at Canaima. I think that would have been a lot more interesting. And it would have been interesting to kind of leave this spider as a mystery, from some far-flung country.
And also, a big part of that 15 minutes, that opening 15 minutes, again, however long it was, it's not just establishing the spider, it's establishing Atherton. And at the end of the day, Atherton doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, he
kind of unceremoniously gets killed, and then it's not really like... Is he kind of the reason this all happened? Sort of, maybe. The movie doesn't really pay that off in any significant way. He gets killed, so do a bunch of people, I don't know.
Yeah, and you're right. It spends a lot of time setting up two characters. It sets up Manley and Atherton. And Manley gets killed at the end of that 15 minutes, and you're right, and Atherton isn't in it for the next hour. So, yeah, you're right. It's an odd kind of opening, though it does look beautiful, like all those opening shots of I assume, the Amazon.
Yeah, I actually, a couple things to point out about that. First, something about the DVD I rented here or something. It was like way too dark. I had to bump up the brightness on my computer screen, and then it looked beautiful. Like, it looked... I was like watching it and I'm like, why is it kind of ugly? And then it's like, let me just adjust my brightness. Oh, it's not ugly. So I don't know what kind of DVD, this is not a great DVD or whatever. But, and then also, I mentioned obviously Spielberg's the producer. The director of this is Frank Marshall, who produced, along with Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy, a bunch of Spielberg's movies. Frank Marshall produces like Back to the Future, like a lot of that stuff in the 80s.
Oh, okay.
I think this is his first movie as a director. I'm not 100% sure, but he definitely is trying to do a Spielberg thing, and I think for the most part it works. But he predates Spielberg in beauty shots of helicopters flying over the jungle. This feels like a trial run for Jurassic Park here in this opening.
It almost does. I agree. It almost
Yeah, we just need that
like
John Williams score, though. I mean,
yeah,
exactly.
I was so taken by the scenery in that opening bit that I kind of wish that the rest of the movie was just set in Venezuela. But
I kind of wish none of it was, though, is my thing, based on the rest of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I just wanted to see it because I think Venezuela is probably really beautiful.
Because it looks neat, but it is incongruous with the rest of the movie, though.
Exactly. And yeah, and going back to your point, if they had just opened the movie with Canaima and
established Jeff Daniels right off the bat, you know,
though
and his family, because we didn't get that much with his wife. We could have gotten more.
No, but I do like the way that he's first brought into the movie. I like that whole spider falling into their yard. But yeah, I don't know. This movie just doesn't hit for me, and if I'm honest, part of it's John Goodman. I like him a lot. I like him a lot, but like, there's something about the character, like, especially
there's nothing about the character that's bad.
Well, especially the bit when I like it when he stepped on the spider, but when he's like walking around, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm bad." I'm like,
that was hilarious. It's because the dog's barking at him, and the dog is the only one who witnessed him do that badass thing. But the badass thing is he just stepped on a spider, which is something we do on accident half the time.
Yeah, I get it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a big fan of John Goodman. I don't know. I like him though. But yeah, Arachnophobia. I don't know. Fine movie. Watch it. Don't watch it. doesn't matter to me. It was an alright movie. But let's move on to a rather embarrassing movie for one specific giant character. How about you take it away, Patrick?
Well, I gotta be honest, I don't know what you're talking about with that, but the movie is Mothra versus Godzilla. The year is 1964. The director is Ishiro Honda, who directed, of course, the original Godzilla, as well as King Kong vs. Godzilla. He did not direct Godzilla Raids Again. And of course, at some point, there was a Mothra movie. I suppose maybe we need to point that out. Yeah, in
62, I think.
So, yeah, 61, 62 or something. We did King Kong before we did King Kong versus Godzilla. I'm not gonna dig up, okay, we have to do every movie Rodan is in before Rodan appears in a Godzilla movie that we do in the series. We can't keep doing that because we need to do Godzilla movies, damn it. And
well, okay, well, hold on. Can we backtrack to what I said first? Because I have some questions for you before we really get into this.
All right, what do we got?
So my first question is, Patrick, I'm not super familiar with the Godzilla franchise. I grew up watching the one with the guy who killed 2 people in Ireland, as starring
Liam Neeson.
No. No, what's his name? I always forget his name because he's such a nobody.
Matthew Broderick.
Thank you. That's the Godzilla I grew up with.
Sure.
But when I discovered that Godzilla is kind of like a loved and beloved character, I was like, oh, I'm going to watch some old Godzilla movies. And I did, and I was confused as to why Godzilla was the villain.
Yeah, it changed at a certain point. I mean, he's a villain early. I think Invasion of the Astro Monster might be kind of the first hero Godzilla.
Yeah, so my question was going to be, when does Godzilla become the hero? Because he's certainly not in this movie. And then here's my second question. Does Godzilla get more graceful as we continue with Godzilla movies, or does he continue to fall into castles and get his tail stuck in things?
This movie is an anomaly. Godzilla is unusually clumsy in this movie, and I don't know why that is, but it's amazing.
I know. It's like, it just reminded me of, what was it, King Kong versus Godzilla when he falls into the pit? Like, everything he was doing was ridiculous.
He fell into the pit in that one, but if you remember with King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong, for the most part, was the goofy one. And that was a conscious decision on the part of the filmmakers that they wanted to humanize Kong by making him kind of funny. This time, I don't think the same thought process is going into Godzilla here. I think it's because he's been underground for the past few years and he's just trying to get his footing back, literally. But yeah, he falls over so many times in this movie.
And it's always like, and they always like show close-ups of his stupid rubbery feet, and it's just like, oops, I slipped.
Well, and it's funny, too, because most of the time he's falling over, or at least early in the movie. Godzilla doesn't show up until almost halfway through this movie, so I don't mean early in the movie, but early in his appearances. When he falls over, it's funny, because it's a guy in a rubber costume falling over, but he's not just falling over, he's falling over and knocking down, a 100-year-old building or something. So there's like a seriousness even in the silliness.
Well, yeah, you have the public running away from Godzilla because he's just unearthed himself. And as they're all running away, he's getting his tail stuck on like a telecommunications tower, and he knocks it over and it falls on top of him. You know? And then he
falls into that giant pagoda, and then out of like anger, he tears it apart afterwards.
Yeah, and it's just like, this is how embarrassing for this monster.
This is wonderful. He's just a big dumb animal.
And it's
great.
I like this new Godzilla suit, and I like how it has like rubbery jowls.
Yeah, I see that. To me, Godzilla looks a little bit different in every movie. Too much rubber on the jowls. He shakes around a little. He's got a little bit of the boss nass.
He's got a bit of Richard Nixon going on.
Sure. I don't know if he's that destructive, but All right, so we got to get into this movie, but I was going to say the film also stars, and I'm pointing this out because he passed away recently.
Oh, no.
Akira Takarada died March 14th, 2022. He's the star of this movie. He plays Ichiro Sakai, and by the way, I'll be pronouncing virtually all these names wrong, I'm sure, but I'm doing my best. So I heard when he passed away, and people were, like, I saw some people were upset. It's like, oh yeah, he's in a bunch of Godzilla movies. My first thought was, oh, he was in the Godzilla suit. Because I have never really paid that much attention to actors in Godzilla films. I wouldn't have known they repeat actors a lot, but I think in many cases they do. And Akira Takarada is he's the main guy in the original Godzilla. He's goodness, I don't remember his name in that movie, but he's the one. He's not the guy with the eye patch. He's like the main character. He's like
he's like the love interest of that woman.
Yeah, the professor's daughter. Yeah, he's kind of. I guess you could say he's the main character in that movie.
Yeah.
He was not in either Godzilla Raids Again or King Kong vs. Godzilla, so I guess I will have to keep an eye on him in future movies in which he appears, because I assume it's more than just two. I wouldn't have necessarily recognized him. It's just like I at this point I recognize the name.
It looks innocent as a gigantic egg, but its unseen powers are so great that its worshippers beg the thing's indulgence in self-abasing ceremonies.
So the movie begins with a big typhoon taking out an entire coastline of whatever part of Japan this is.
The model work here is fantastic.
No,
all the
it's
miniature
not.
stuff.
I mean, listen, they do their best, but it looks like toys.
You got things blowing away. Anyways, I liked it.
What I do think they do a good job of, they make the water look dirty. That's good. That really makes it feel less like a bathtub. So, reporter Ichiro, Akira Takarada, as I mentioned, and photographer Junko show up to survey this damage at this coastline. Junko she basically has no idea what she's doing. She's like brand new. This is, I guess, like maybe her first assignment. But they find a strange object floating amidst the destruction. But then also, more importantly, there is a giant egg at sea just off the coast, and that eventually washes ashore. And Professor Miura comes in from one of the universities, and he's studying the egg, and he's talking to these other two characters, Ichiro and Junko. And they're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Is this dangerous? What's going on? And then in steps Mr. Kumayama, who is a character who in 1964 made the bold decision to go with the Hitler mustache.
I was about to say, yes.
I mean, we have to point that out. And I don't know if that's like, because he's a bad guy, if that's like a sly nod. I don't know. If you know, I mean, Japan worked
a sly nod
with Germany, obviously, but like, I don't know. I'm not sure if we're supposed to be kind of thinking of Hitler when we look at him, but that's like,
I like the idea that he shows up on screen with his little mustache and he turns to directly at the camera and winks. You know, like, I'm a bad guy. Wink, wink.
But yeah, so this guy has purchased the egg, and everyone's like, wait a second, you can't just buy this, like.
Yeah, it just floated in from the ocean. What are you talking about?
Who does he buy it from? We don't really know. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that this asshole capitalist guy is going to do something. We don't quite know what yet. So at this point, Ichiro, Junko, and Professor Miura want to stop him, but they also acknowledge that, like, oh, we can't just go to the government because they don't respond quick enough.
Classic governments.
At least in some of the Godzilla movies, there is a bit of social commentary about the Japanese government. Maybe a little bit here, definitely in Shin Godzilla, and maybe in the original. Maybe that's it. I don't know. You can already kind of see. There's definitely commentary in this film about the nuclear weapons and stuff, but as you can probably imagine, we're moving closer and closer to schlock within the Godzilla series, so we're going to lose that, you know, sooner rather than later, but there's still a little bit, there's remnants of it here. So they discover that Kumayama isn't independently doing this. He's actually working with someone else, and it's this guy, Jiro Torihara. Yeah, he's working with that guy. This is Happy Enterprises, of course, is the name of the company. And the plan is to build an amusement park around the egg. Now, what exactly does that look like? Yeah, I don't know. But early on, Kumayama does say, like, when our heroes are talking to him like, oh, this egg is way more valuable to science than it is to you. And he's like, well, don't worry, we'll let everyone watch the incubation, but they have to pay a fee. And it's like, okay, so he's doing profit off it, and I guess they're doing an amusement park. Why not?
This is kind of like a Jurassic Park reference. Long before Jurassic Park.
There's also, want to say it's Godzilla versus Gigan, there's a Godzilla-themed amusement park. At that point, Godzilla is the hero, so that makes a lot more sense than if they were to build an amusement park for the guy now. So as Kumiyama and Torihata are in their office, they discover the twin fairies, which they have some kind of, I don't think it's said in the movie, but they have some kind of like Japanese name referring to what they are, and I'm just not going to bother because I don't know how the hell to say that.
Yeah, I'm looking at it as well, and I'm not going to bother either.
Yeah, they're the fairies, they're the twin fairies, whatever. These are these little pocket-sized women who speak in high-pitched voices and are tied to Mothra. They're servants of Mothra. They are extensions of Mothra. You know, I think this movie itself kind of leaves some of that up to interpretation, but they're playing with these businessmen. They say, hey, give us back the egg. It's our egg. And they evade capture. This movie does a good job of, when it cuts to the actresses running around, they do like a good job of having like giant couch sets and stuff. They do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Most of the time when they show these women, it's kind of awkwardly...
like green screened or something.
Like it's not always great, but these scenes in the office were great. But they eventually escape, and they meet with Ichiro, Junko, and Miura, and explain what their whole deal is. They're like, hey, we're from this other island that's had nuclear testing. The egg washed ashore because there was because the storm sent it flying or whatever, you know what I mean? A rock slide, right?
It was like the storm was pounding the coast of this infant island, and the egg was dislodged from its underground space.
And they're like, okay, but what's Mothra? Who is this? And it's just like, oh, she's right over there. And then they see Mothra, and Mothra's just chilling there.
I like that reveal, actually. And
oh, yeah, it's great. And I love right away we established Mothra just kind of lazily flaps her wings, and you see the effect that it has on the wind with our characters. So you can kind of imagine, okay, when she's actually flying, that this could be a destructive force potentially.
Yeah. And I love the look of Mothra. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like all the color.
Yeah, very colorful, very fuzzy also.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I feel like each iteration of Mothra, and I'm assuming this is... I know I've seen the original Mothra movie. I don't remember it well. There was something that I thought was in this movie, and it wasn't in this movie, so I assume that's actually from that movie, but there's a scene where the fairies are like... I don't know if they're held captive, but they're like performing at like a music hall or something. And it's like, okay, I guess that must be in the original Mothra, because it's not in this. Huh. But yeah, each iteration of Mothra seems to go slightly more bug-like, because Mothra, not that bug-like in this one, really. Just, you know, big, fluffy kind of thing.
It looks like a Beanie Baby in this movie.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But yes, so the fairies explain that when the egg hatches, it's going to be another Mothra, and the Mothra larva will naturally know to go back to Infant Island, but in between now and then, it's also going to be scared, and it's going to end up just causing a bunch of destruction because it doesn't know what the hell's going on. The fairies need the help of these three people in order to get the egg back. Our three heroes meet with the two businessmen. They bring the fairies as like proof of Mothra, but it doesn't work. And then in a total dick move, Kumiyama tries to buy the fairies.
Yeah.
Because he wants to even profit off of them, these independent lives, right? These,
It's a pretty scuzzy thing to do. I mean, because they sit down and they're like, this is Mothra's egg. Mothra would like the egg. They want the egg back on this island. They're asking you, please, you've bought this egg. It's not your egg. And he goes, hey, okay, I get it. That's all great. But can I buy these women?
You know, it establishes that Kumiyama, like, he's basically never run into a problem that he can't buy his way out of, which eventually comes true with the bad press that Ichiro supplies, because he basically is able to just launch his own PR campaign against that stuff. But at the same time, what we eventually learn, or maybe we've already even kind of learned, is that Kumiyama's not really the money.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually Kumiyama is confronted by the people of this island who say that, I guess this is who he's bought the egg from, I guess, because they want their money now. He said, no, our agreement was I would give you the money when the egg hatched. But now I guess at this point they're having second thoughts because they think all the bad press is going to just, he's not going to have any money to deal with.
Yeah.
Kumiyama ends up taking out a loan from his financier, Torahara, but he's forced to put the egg up as collateral, which I'm not 100% sure what that means when they first establish it, but then... So the egg at this point is like in a big, giant greenhouse, basically.
Yeah.
And he starts heating it to speed up the incubation and hopefully have the egg be born, or whatever is inside of it be born. And so, meanwhile, Professor Miura, and this is a little strange because this, it feels like it was so long since we even bothered with this, but remember that foreign object that we discovered in the wreckage? Well, apparently that was important because it was radioactive or irradiated or whatever.
Yeah, and which, by the way, it wasn't until this scene that I realized what that object was.
What was it, a nipple?
No,
kind of
isn't
looked
it...
like a giant nipple.
No, isn't it like a piece of Godzilla's scale?
That would make sense, but it's just I don't know.
It's like a weird gray-blue blob thing.
Yeah, it's like multicolored.
But I was like, Godzilla does that lightning thing, it's... Or the not the lightning thing, the fire
Atomic
thing.
breath.
Yeah, and he turns kind of bluey. I was like, that looks like it could be a Godzilla scale.
Maybe, yeah. It's something Godzilla related, I guess. But yeah, remember how Godzilla's in this movie? It's finally about to come true. Professor Miura discovers that this object is irradiated, so he and Ichiro and Junko head to the area where they found it, which is now no longer underwater, and it's basically almost looks like a desert. It's just a bunch of dirt. Yeah. And basically right when they get there, Godzilla emerges from the ground, and he wanders his clumsy ass around town. He gets his tail stuck in, as you mentioned, a big radio tower, and then when he finally gets it free, the radio tower falls on top of him, and he falls over. He does a lot of tripping.
It's so embarrassing for Godzilla.
It's wonderful. It's beautiful stuff.
It really is. I like it a lot.
And I wonder how much of it, some of it very clearly is planned, because... when he trips into that pagoda and then he tears it apart. Okay, obviously that model was built to be taken apart.
Yeah.
But maybe the Godzilla series as a whole, but definitely this movie in particular, they're not afraid to keep mistakes in the movie, because there's a famous scene later on where the Godzilla head catches fire. It's very clearly a mistake, but they leave it in because it looks awesome.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's very clearly a mistake that wasn't supposed to happen. the guy in the Godzilla suit was probably either he didn't know what was happening, because maybe you can't even tell, or he was scared out of his fucking mind, but it's beautiful.
Going back to Godzilla slipping into that beautiful Japanese castle, it looks almost like Himeji Castle or something. But anyways, there's a close-up of his foot, and you see him slide down this embankment and then just slide into the castle. And you're like, okay, but how much, why? Why did we need a scene of Godzilla clumsily falling into a castle?
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Jan. Get it?
Is that what it was for, though? Or was he supposed to crush part of it and then tear it apart, but instead the actor accidentally fell into the castle?
It's a good question. I think because we get that close up, I think it's very clearly a trip and then a compensating for falling, getting mad at this thing because I fell into it. But
Godzilla's a dick.
Well, no, I do think this movie in particular, compared to the other Godzilla movies that we've had so far, I don't know if their plan at this point is to make Godzilla a hero in the future movies, but I can almost imagine that going into the thought process of a little bit of this, because Godzilla's destruction here, for the most part, he's not just destroying to destroy. He's destroying mostly out of clumsiness in this movie.
Yeah.
And if that's maybe the first step in kind of making him a hero, that, again, I don't know if that's the thought process here, but, in the original 1954 Godzilla, he's just breaking everything in his path, taking out bridges, planes, buildings, all this stuff. This movie is just like, it's a few things that he kind of bumps into.
Yeah, and
it's a different kind of destruction.
You make a really good point, because I didn't really think of that while I was watching this.
I didn't either. I just thought of that now.
Wow, you're so brilliant.
I know.
You're totally right. This might be the Godzilla movies that we've seen the least amount of city destruction.
Godzilla's never had a problem taking out military, okay? That's going to happen, and he does an awful lot of that in this movie, but not as much random building destruction. Not as many innocent civilians get killed in this movie as in most other early Godzilla movies, I guess.
No, and even the characters, they go into it with kind of a plan that they've carried out 1,000,000 times before, or at least 4 times before, or 3, I guess, where they're like, okay, let's keep Godzilla away from the cities. Let's use the military to push him kind of towards the coast. Oh, let's use this trick with giant electrified telephone pole things.
Well, you see how well the evacuation works, with the exception of that one school teacher and her 10 children there. Everyone else gets the memo and is able to get out safely, right?
Yeah, except for that poor lady.
Yeah, well, I guess she was on an island that didn't have speakers. I don't know what she was doing there, but I get the impression that was a field trip. I don't think her school was on that island.
No. Yeah, wouldn't that be an unfortunate field trip?
What high school do you go to? I go to Alcatraz. So with Godzilla active, we see a lot of shots of, I think more than in the other films, of real-life locations and people running around, and then Godzilla in the background. It's not a perfect effect, but I like that they integrate that real life with the Godzilla.
Yeah.
We still get, whenever he tears something down, it's a model, obviously, but we do get a lot of shots of Godzilla slowly walking in the background there, and that's because we can show real life panic, real life locations in the foreground. It's nice. It mixes it up a bit.
Yeah, and you can see that they're using this new technology to kind of make it look more realistic, whereas with the older Godzilla movies, the models were really good, but also they were shooting it in black and white, which helped a lot for the realism. Black
and white and night specifically, because when we see Godzilla in the day in that movie, he doesn't look amazing. No. At night, he looks perfect. And it's all during the day. There's not a single night shot of Godzilla in this movie, I don't think, is there?
I think there's a bit where he's fighting some fighter planes that's kind of at night or dusk or something.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It kind of gets darker and then it gets lighter when he gets back to fighting the larvae.
Yeah.
I don't know, does Ed Wood direct this movie? Or,
But it is interesting, and I have a question for you now that this has come up. There are a lot of goofy things about this Godzilla movie, namely the costume. But do you think... I'm watching this movie thinking, I'm enjoying it, but what I'm getting out of it is some chuckles while I'm watching this interesting movie from the 60s. I'm like, oh, this is kind of funny to watch because it's kind of goofy, but it's not the fault of the movie. It's the fault of the limitations of technology and
of the time, and then of it, maybe even you could say being a Japanese post-war economy movie. This isn't a big budget American modern film. Yeah.
I feel like if this movie had been in black and white and mostly at night, much like the first movie, it would have come across as a lot less goofy and more serious. What do you think?
I think that's probably true. I also think, and we'll get into this when we kind of get into the Mothra lore, but I also think Mothra's very existence needs a certain level of fantasy, of goofiness.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm using fantasy and goofiness. I don't mean that they're interchangeable, but I think, Godzilla can be if you want him to be, Godzilla can be this hyper-realistic, serious, sci-fi symbol of nuclear holocaust. Mothra is out of a fantasy movie, and you can't mix those two in a hyper-realistic, hyper-serious movie, I should say. At least I don't think you can. I'm yet to see anyone, if that's ever pulled off, I don't know.
Yeah, but what's weird about this movie is that Mothra is the kind of... What's the word I'm looking
Hero?
for? Well, yeah, Mothra's the hero, but Mothra is juxtaposed to Godzilla as the kind of hero of a nuclear holocaust, this heroic byproduct of a nuclear holocaust, almost. You know, Mothra comes from this devastated island that had like nuclear tests tested on it, I guess. And much like this kind of nuclear angel, this big giant multicolored winged angel, Mothra swoops in to try to save the day from this other hellish actual nuclear holocaust creature spreading fire and some destruction in this movie.
Was there a question there?
Well, no, I'm just saying it's kind of weird because you were saying that like Mothra is this kind of silly character.
I understand what you're saying, and this is like the next scene we're going to talk about, anyways. When they go to Infant Island, yes. So it's actually on the suggestion of the goofy comic relief character that they go ask Mothra for help. Out of desperation, they being Ichiro Junko and Professor Miura, go to Infant Island to plead with the fairies and the people to ask for Mothra's help. You can see a strong King Kong influence once they arrive there, that this is kind of their version of these weird native Skull Island people, right? They're believing like demons and witchcraft and all that stuff. They make them drink something that
red liquid
cleanses their bodies of evil spirits or whatever. So these are a mystic people. But when they first arrive there, they also comment on how, this island probably used to be all lush and beautiful, and it's just, devastated by there was like one nuclear test, I guess, in the area, and that's what caused that. But there's also a giant turtle in the background in that scene which is adorable. It's just hanging out there. They don't acknowledge it, but it's just like hanging out. I love that. I love that thing.
Yeah, it keeps on bobbing its head, and I'm like, is it supposed to be doing that? Or
yeah, he's having a great time, that guy in that costume. But so the people, the villagers, the islanders, whatever you want to call them, say that no, we will not help the people of Japan. The people of Japan tested this nuclear weapon on us and destroyed our lifestyle. Like, why should we bother helping you? But then they overhear the twin fairies singing, and they follow them into like this cave, which takes them to this lush oasis, which the fairies say that this is what's sustaining the island. This is, for whatever reason, the one part of the island that has been untouched by nuclear devastation. The fairies also don't want Mothra to help until Junko, of all people, makes a nice little speech about how there are good people and there are bad people, but even the bad ones don't necessarily deserve to die. Mm-hmm. And like, this is our only hope. Can you please help us? That's the speech that kind of works in their favor. And I like that because previously Junko is kind of a little goofball. Like, she doesn't really know what she's doing as a photographer. And so I like that she gets that moment. She gets something to do that isn't just a little silly. But so the fairies go to sing to Mothra, and they tell them that yes, Mothra will help with whatever strength she has left. And they're like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, she's going to die soon. This is an old Yeller situation here. You got to go put the Mothra down. So our three heroes go back to, again, whatever place where this Mothra egg is being kept. This is also the scene where we get the two businessmen confronting each other in the hotel room. Kumeyama is upset because he's been ripped off now. He starts beating Torahata. He beats the shit out of him. There's blood coming out of his mouth and everything. And then he's about to steal all the money when Torahata grabs the gun and shoots him just as Godzilla is approaching the hotel. And so Torahata is killed as he's trying to flee from the hotel with all of his money. And when Godzilla, of course, knocks it over. So this is like the real big incident of destruction that isn't kind of accidental Godzilla destruction. I guess you could still say it's accidental, but like, it's not goofy, like he fell into something. Destruction.
Yeah,
right?
He kind of just rocks up to the hotel and knocks it over.
It's the villain that gets killed. I'm sure there's dozens of other people, if not hundreds, but like we do see the villain die, so it's like, okay, that's fine. Godzilla gets to the amusement park under construction and starts breaking the giant greenery. The egg is still not hatched at this point.
Yeah.
And then Mothra shows up. And, Mothra, this giant... Is it a moth? I mean, I know the name Mothra, but, like, it's more butterfly than moth, really.
Though, I will tell you, you know how you can tell it is a moth? And you can...
No, I don't.
When one of these critters lands, if its wings are up, like off the ground, it's a butterfly. If its wings are spread out and flat, it's a moth. So when Mothra is like sitting on rocks and shit...
So Mothra's man spread, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
The initial fight between Mothra and Godzilla. A lot of flap in the wings, which creates the wind that kind of keeps Godzilla at a distance. Godzilla unable to land his atomic breath on Mothra, unable to get a clean shot. But Godzilla eventually gets back to the egg, which is kind of rolled around at this point. And as he's about to destroy the egg, Mothra picks him up by the tail, not really up, but picks up the tail, and drags him away. And this is wonderful.
Oh yeah, it looks great.
We get the close-ups of the guy in the Godzilla costume just sliding across the ground. It looks wonderful. It's really, really fun.
How did they do the Mothra thing? Like, was it somebody in a... Like, was there somebody in a costume involved, or was it just like a giant stuffed animal that they hung from the ceiling?
Yeah, I think it's got to be the latter. I know you can see strings here and there, but I also think some of this stuff in particular with Mothra dragging Godzilla, I think some of it might be shot in reverse, because some of it just looks a little funky to me at one point or another, and it's like, okay, so maybe Godzilla is crawling, and they're shooting it in reverse and maybe speeding it up or something. But, if you think about it, like, not the easiest monster to make work in a movie involving costume monsters, right?
No, yeah.
So credit the ambition of the people behind not just this movie, but the original 1961 Mothra, maybe the 1955 Rodan, because Rodan also flies. Mothra eventually gets Godzilla into, like, this pit and is just shooting all this... toxic yellow stuff all over him.
Yeah, like toxic pollen or something.
And it looks like Mothra's winning. Like, Mothra's like, oh my god, is it over? But then Godzilla finally is able to land some of his atomic breath, hits Mothra's wing, and Mothra just kind of glides away with, like, smoke coming off her wing and goes and dies next to her egg. Very, very... heart-wrenching scene.
Like, it really is. And that whole scene where Mothra is fighting Godzilla with the toxic mist pollen stuff is great, because Godzilla's like writhing around, shooting his atomic breath all over the place. It just looks really good. I don't know how to describe it other than that. It's like a really cool looking...
Yeah, I like that stuff.
Off.
The stuff that I didn't really like was before Godzilla gets thrown, or before he kind of stumbles into the pit. When Mothra's just kind of like scratching at his head and stuff, that stuff is like really, it's just a lot of quick cutting and it just doesn't look very good. But as long as there's some distance between the monsters, it looks awesome.
And also too, when you said that, Mothra's death is kind of heart-wrenching, it really is, because Mothra glides over to this egg and lands on this rock, and one of Mothra's wings is draped over this egg. And Mothra just dies right there.
Right. And so at this point, Godzilla seems to have lost interest in the egg, so he just goes walking around, and this is when the military makes its move, and they have a plan to electrocute him.
Which is like the plan in every movie. And it fails every time.
I mean, it doesn't work too well. It works a little bit. Godzilla's head starts on fire. I think that's after a plane shoots him, though. But yeah, they've got planes shooting at him. They're electrocuting him from all these big towers. Eventually, they have all these helicopters drop nets on him, and this is where it actually starts to work. Godzilla's covered with like 4 or 5 nets. They're continuing to electrocute him, and then the general is like, hey, boost up the voltage. And they're like, but it's already at its limit. It's like, I don't care. Blast that thing. And then this they do, and then the generators fail. So Godzilla is able to regain control, and he takes out all the tanks and planes and all that stuff. And then he makes his way back No, he doesn't go back to the egg. He goes to another island. He like walks through town and then is on his way to the island where the teacher is. And this kind of comes out of nowhere. There's one guy scrambling to get on a plane, on a ship as everyone's evacuating, and he's like, "No, Miss whoever, this teacher is over on that island with 10 school children or something." And they're like, "Oh, well, that sucks, but we can't really do anything about that now."
Oops.
Yeah, it kind of comes out of nowhere, and then it's like, what kind of field trip was this? But so Godzilla's heading to that island. Why is he actively hunting this teacher? But at this point, the Mothra egg has started to hatch, and out come 2 larvae. So it's twin Mothras. It's suggested in this movie, or the possibility is at least raised, that Mothra doesn't really die so much as transfer consciousness into the egg. You know, because Mothra's this big, fantastical, mystical being. At any rate, we got 2 Mothras. They make their way over to the island where Godzilla is heading and where those teachers are, or the teacher and the students are. Then so our heroes agree to get on the ship, and they're like, okay, we will go find these kids, save them while these larvae distract Godzilla. They end up doing more than just distracting him. At first, one of them bites down on his tail and basically just pushes him into a frenzy, where his tail is going around. There's really cool shots of the Mothra larva just stuck on his tail as his tail is going up and down and stuff.
And, that's something they do well in this. It's like all the movements with Godzilla's tail.
Yeah.
Like it looks like an actual animal tail.
Or when it gets stuck in things, yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful stuff. Then he's basically about to kill this larva when he finally gets it off his tail, but then the other larva starts shooting like a web on him or something.
Yeah, it's like silk or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like silk. Are the moths known for this? I don't know.
I've let's call that an entomologist from Arachnophobia. He might know.
Eventually, it's both these larvae just shooting all their silk all over Godzilla, and it creates like this. Looks like a big thing of cheesecloth over him, basically. But we see the progression because it gets more and more each time. For a while, he's able to at least keep his face largely free because he keeps breathing his atomic breath and like poking holes in it. But eventually, it gets too much for him. And this is, of course, our heroes save the children and the teacher. And then at this point, Godzilla is completely overcome by this. He's completely enveloped within this net. Everything but his feet are free. And like he does so many other times throughout this movie, he falls over, and this time he falls into the sea, where perhaps he will never be seen again. We will have to wait
perhaps
at least until later this year, the same fucking year.
Yeah, in December.
Ghidorah, the 3-headed monster. So yeah, he wasn't dead for long. But then the Mothras head back to Infant Island, and our characters in the trademark slap together Godzilla social message at the end of the movie are like, oh, we're just watching them leave, we're not even going to thank them. And then Akira Takarada's like, the best way we can thank them is to make this world a better place or something. And then Professor Miura's like, that's right, a world built on mutual trust. And that is the end of Mothra vs. Godzilla. Jim, what did you think?
I liked this movie a lot, actually. I liked, again, how goofy it was. I liked the colorful Mothra. I liked the ugly larvae.
Yeah, they look kind of like turds.
That's exactly what they looked like, yeah. Yeah, somebody pinched a loaf. Yeah, it was just like a fun movie. The thing I was kind of taken aback by was how, like, the first half of the movie was really about the human characters.
Yeah.
In a movie called Mothra vs. Godzilla, the first half was all about the people, and I'm like, nah, I don't care. show me these 2 giant monsters fighting. It was kind of the same thing as like King Kong versus Godzilla, but that was really exciting. That was worth the wait.
All right. Well, you know what? I mean, any giant monster movie is going to have to just kind of go through the motions of human characters. Right? Freddy versus Jason does it. Like, that's what movies do, right? I think this movie does a good job of that. As far as all the Godzilla movies, this to me gives a compelling human story or a story with the human characters, I should say. And it involves Mothra, obviously. It doesn't really involve Godzilla for a long time, which I'm fine with.
Yeah.
But it's, the twin fairies and this evil fucking businessman with the Hitler mustache doing his thing. I love it. I find that stuff really interesting. I think Kumiyama is an awesome villain. At least, really just for the first half of the movie. Then, after a while, he kind of, sort of off-screen, gets in a fight with his business partner, and then next time we see him, he's, like, literally fighting him and just trying to steal money, and it's like, okay, this character's not that interesting anymore, but...
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and I mean, because when you first meet him, he almost
But by that
seems...
point, Godzilla's going around, so I don't need that many interesting characters. The interesting characters are there in the first half before we get the monsters. I think it's a perfect balance of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I wasn't. I guess by the end of the movie, I didn't care about the fact that half the movie was devoted to the people characters of the movie. I liked it. Was there that much people stuff in King Kong versus Godzilla? Or there's probably more.
Well, King Kong versus Godzilla, too. If we're comparing these two, like, King Kong versus Godzilla is schlock. This movie rides the line a bit, but to me, it's not schlock. Mm-hmm. King Kong vs. Godzilla is like a glimpse of what's to come in the series in like the 70s. I don't think this movie is there. And I think this movie has the ability to create an interesting character or two and ability to make Godzilla still a threatening villain to a certain extent. I mean, yeah, he's clumsy as hell in this movie, but that's whatever, you know.
Yeah. The only thing I wasn't really jiving with was the twin fairies. It felt kind of shoehorned in. I don't know, like, but again, that's not my culture. I'm not Japanese. Maybe there's some meaning to it that I'm not picking up on.
Well, I want to talk about that because I kind of said we were going to talk about that, and then I guess we didn't end up really. But what I like about this movie, what I like, I guess, about Mothra as a foil to Godzilla, for lack of a better term. Godzilla is this scientific creation. Mothra is maybe a scientific creation. I'm not 100% sure because I don't really remember the 1961 Mothra too well. I know the fairies are in that, though. Again, I remembered a fairy scene that wasn't in this movie, so it must be in that one. But it's mysticism versus science, but it's also like, I mean, in future movies, I'm thinking of the most recent American movie that had Mothra in it. Mothra is basically there to provide kind of balance to the world, and in that case to fight Ghidorah and Rodan. In this case, you know, she reluctantly agrees to fight Godzilla, but really it's less about like order, and to me it's just that kind of interesting science versus mysticism angle. Like, you see the people at
Infant Island.
That is a fantastical way of life. You know, that this is something that there's traces of this in King Kong versus Godzilla, but at the end of the day, King Kong, despite being a large ape, is not that fantastical. Like, he's not born of science, we know that, but
yeah,
he's not, you know, he's kind of worshipped as a god, sort of, by these people that are afraid of him, but he doesn't have twin fairies going around, and twin mystical fairies who are able to evade capture by, like, disappearing and reappearing, and who can also read minds. Like, that fantasy element is such a big part of Mothra, and I think that's really interesting to pair these two monsters against each other, because they are so different. Not only does one walk and, let's be honest, stumble, and the other one flies, but they're just so different. I like that. I think that really works. I don't know if this has come up in this podcast before. It's definitely come up between you and me. I hate fantasy. I just do. It's just not my thing.
I can guarantee you this has come up multiple times in the podcast.
Okay, but to me, I don't like that fantasy stuff. Maybe I wouldn't like Mothra by herself that much, but Mothra in opposition to something that isn't fantastical, I think, is interesting.
I just looked it up, and before I tell you my findings, I'm going to explain what my point of view on this was. I thought it was interesting that you had like a hellish, destructive monster that was created by science, and then you had a monster that was also created by science, but it was this heroic monster that was quite literally swooping in to attempt to save the day anyways. And I thought it was neat that you had these two monsters that were both created by science battling it out, but one was bad and only cared about destruction, and this other one was worshipped as like a deity and was kind of like a symbol for what happens to life when it's severely irradiated by a nuclear explosion or something. You know, like Mothra's dying, this island is essentially dead. I just thought that was like a whole kind of neat point of view. But as you were talking there, I just looked it up, and the original Mothra movie, which you were right originally, 1961, I said 62, Mothra is an island deity to the peoples of Infant Island that has just always existed. I don't think it was created by the nuclear explosion.
Yeah, I was going to say, in this movie, obviously the island has been affected by nuclear, but they don't necessarily imply that Mothra is giant because of that. I think you might kind of assume that, just like, oh yeah, because that's how Godzilla was born. But
yeah,
I don't think
and that's why I assumed that. That's exactly why. But yeah, I'm just reading this. The team discovers a vast jungle of mutated flora, a fleeing native tribe, and two young women only 12 inches tall. So yeah, so Mothra is just an existence. It is this fantasy thing. And now that I understand that, I really like what you were saying about it and your whole point of view on that. I agree with you.
Any other thoughts on Mothra vs. Godzilla? You like the goofiness?
Yeah,
of the Godzilla falling.
I'm really excited to get into other Godzilla movies that just get
the pure schlock.
Yeah,
it's still a few years. You know, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, probably tonally in line with this. Invasion of the Astro Monster, maybe a bit goofier because it's just very high sci-fi, and then Ebirah sucks. But then once we get Godzilla's son, then it's, no turning back from schlock.
Well, I'm still amazed at how different this movie is to the first Godzilla movie tonally.
Yeah.
And even like the James Bond series hasn't gone through that big of like a tonal shift. James Bond has always been kind of tongue-in-cheek, and sure, you had like pervy old man Roger Moore and the height of like stupid, awful jokes and stuff in that Roger Moore era, but that was still kind of in line with Bond. Whereas these two movies, compared to the original Godzilla, this is kind of like a schlock movie. A kaiju smash 'em up,
But at the same time, it's a lot closer to the original Godzilla movie than King Kong versus Godzilla was.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I agree with you on that.
They don't transport a giant monster by balloon in this movie.
And then drop them hard onto the ground.
There's no monster that gets drunk and passes out after drinking a bunch of berry juice in this movie.
Yeah, you're very right about that. Very, very right.
So, Jim, which of these two movies, Arachnophobia or Mothra vs. Godzilla, do you prefer?
Mothra versus Godzilla. And I think it's obvious why I prefer it. I'm in awe of a stumbling Godzilla and a multicolored Mothra. And I like the story too, but how about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I think, although I didn't enjoy Arachnophobia, I love Godzilla as a character, as a creature, as a franchise. Mothra vs. Godzilla, I don't think I praised it enough. This is a top 5 Godzilla movie. I would probably say top 3. This to me is almost as good as Godzilla gets, even though it is very different from the original. And the original is literally as good as Godzilla gets, but this is something different from that, but it's still very good. So yes, I prefer Godzilla to Arachnophobia. Now, Jim.
Yes.
How do you think this stacks up as a drive-in double feature?
Well, I think it would be almost a perfect drive-in double feature, if I'm honest, if Mothra vs. Godzilla came first.
Okay, explain.
For me, it's that kind of like Mothra vs. Godzilla is goofy because of the effects that they're using, even when they're not trying to be goofy, but it just kind of comes across as that goofiness. You have this giant lizard monster stumbling into things, and you just have like this movie where these two little fairy women exist in it. It's just like a weird kind of offbeat, goofy movie, and it's this Japanese kaiju smash 'em up, like I said, But it's a great kind of monster movie in that sense, because you get these cool monsters that are the stars of the film. And then you go to Arachnophobia, which is also goofy, sometimes doesn't make sense, There's lots of goofy, silly characters, and frankly, the idea of killer spiders is also kind of goofy. Like, especially killer, small, like normal-sized spiders is kind of goofy.
Yeah, there's a silliness to that, yes.
Yeah, but because Arachnophobia is a more modern movie, and they're intentionally trying to be silly for the most part, that kind of like separates it from that unintentional silliness of Mothra versus Godzilla and that kind of outdated style of filmmaking or style of effects. So that's why I'd put Mothra versus Godzilla first and then Arachnophobia. But yeah, I think they just hit like a lot of the same notes, to be honest. And I think this might be the most perfect double feature we've ever had, in my opinion.
Ooh, that's strong. I don't think I would go that far, but I do agree it's a good double feature. I'm not going to necessarily change the order. I think the order is fine the way it is, but I'm actually looking into this now. This might be our first child-friendly double feature ever. I think this is the first episode we've ever done where we don't have a rated R film, or worse. Right? I'm looking. I've just gotten through all of season 1 looking at it. There's at least one R-rated film in every single one of those episodes. Then season 2, we start off with Halloween and House by the Cemetery. Holy shit, a movie that was banned in the UK. With Enter the Ninja, it was R-rated, I think, right?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, no, King Kong Robinson Crusoe on Mars. That may be the only other exception, though. Oh, and I guess Thunderball Soylent Green, a far more recent episode also. But this is a rare child-friendly double feature where a kid can sit down and watch both these movies. Arachnophobia might be a little intense for them, but I think for the most part, you know, a 12-year-old would still get a lot out of that, would still enjoy it. A 12-year-old, if you're anything like me, when I was 12, you're going to fucking love Mothra versus Godzilla. I think I love it even more as a 30-year-old than I did as a 12-year-old, but still, it's a fantastic film. We get bugs, we get negative, evil bugs, and then we get a positive, earth-saving bug. You know, the balancing the bug, the good and evil spectrum with the bug depictions in these films. I think that's interesting. I mean, it's not, but I'm trying to make it interesting. So yes, I think it's an excellent double feature, right? So, Jim, thank you for joining me, and audience, we are actually going to be taking a few weeks off for a few reasons. One, the holidays coming up, so everyone, you know, have a wonderful Christmas. So you have a great New Year. Okay, watch Terror Train on New Year's Eve if you feel compelled to.
Terror Train.
Yeah, it's a Jamie Lee Curtis movie. It's one of 2 horror movies I can think of set on New Year's Eve.
I've never heard of this movie. I'm going to look this up.
It's not bad. I enjoy it, at least. I don't know if it's any good. I always liked it. But so we're going to take a few weeks off. We'll be back in the middle of January. I will have a guest on that episode, Feck, who has been on a couple episodes before. We're going to be doing Face Off, John Woo's Face Off, starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta as each other, as well as the 1999 classic independent film The Blair Witch Project. So stay tuned for that. Check out our YouTube where I've been posting short clips taken from these episodes recently. So we look forward to being back in your lives in January. I think it's 3 weeks' time, right? 3 weeks before we break into your homes and you hear from us once again. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Happy holidays.